Hey everybody, so this is the second BSG orientation video. What I'm going to do at this point is actually go into the BSG system and start walking you through the screens and the decisions and the different functional areas. Um, the caveat I want to make sure everybody is really clear on at this point is once you start messing with this stuff, once you start making these decisions, it's really easy to lose sight of the big picture, right? Because there's so many decisions, there's so many numbers that you're going to be playing with. Um, what's absolutely critical to remember is all of those numbers matter because of the effect they have on your company's ability to be successful in the long run. And so as we're going through this, yeah, you got to understand the details, but you also have to understand how all the details fit together. What you absolutely have to do is keep in mind those fundamentals that we talked about from the first day. Right? So these decisions will affect your costs and the perceived value of your product. And you'll be dealing with elasticity when you set your price. You'll be managing profit, be doing all of those things. It's embodied in these different functional level decisions, right? The other thing I want to make sure you keep in mind is that, uh, like we talked about from the beginning, these organizations are systems. And so you're going to be making decisions in different functional areas. What you have to always remember is that it's not the functional area that matters, it's the way that that fits in with the organization as a whole. And what I'll try to do is show you some specific examples where um, doing what's best for one department, for one function, may not necessarily be what's best for the organization as a whole. I'll try to show you some examples of where decisions that are made in one functional area will have ripple effects across others, right? And so as we're going through this, we're going to go through a number of different functions and different screens. Keep in mind that it's going to be an iterative process because, for example, if you make a decision in uh, marketing, that's going to affect the demand for your product, which is going to have an effect on your production, which is going to have an effect on your distribution, right? And so if you change things as you go along, you might find that you have to circle back, right? And so I'll sort of walk you through that um, as explicitly as I can. Um, what I'm finding is here at home with my Wi-Fi, with my computer system, processing these videos is taking a really long time. So what I'm not sure at this point is how I'm going to break it up. So I'm going to launch into this just like I would have done if we were in class together. And at some point, I may stop and close out this video and process it and upload it, and then pick up from that point on another video. So um, plus, you know, I want to break this up into chunks that are relatively easier to digest, even though I do have full confidence that you all are more than capable of taking in complex ideas, right? Which is why we're all here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause this. I'm going to bring up the decision screens, and we'll go from there. Okay, so when you get registered and you get logged into the BSG system, what you'll want to do is go into the decision and reports. Hopefully you can see my cursor moving here. You're going to find a button that says decisions reports. It'll take you into a screen like this. Now, your screen may actually look different than this. It depends on the size and the resolution of your monitor. Uh, you'll either see this with the menu over here on the left, or you'll see something that looks more like this, where that menu on the left is gone, but you have this button here for menu, which pulls up exactly the same thing. Okay. Um, just for the sake of keeping on the screen, I'm gonna get it back to the way it was here. Okay. Um, so if you look at this menu on the left, what you're going to see is a series of basically different functional areas, right? So each round of the simulation, each year that you're running this company, you're going to have to make decisions about each one of these different areas. Okay, so compensation and training, clearly that's a human resource function. Production, that's an operations thing. Production facilities, also operations, a little bit of finance involved there. You get distribution, you got marketing, you've got different kinds of marketing, different kinds of operations, some other things that we're going to talk about, the celebrity endorsements. I'm going to go through each one of these individually as part of this orientation, but I just want you to get a sense of the scope of the task that you have in front of you, right? Which is why I keep pushing people to to really get familiar with this stuff as quickly as possible, right? Because it's complicated. There's a lot. Okay. Um, I'm going to kind of go through this in a fairly linear way at this point to give you a sense of what the different decisions are. Um, what you're going to find is, like I mentioned before, that it's going to have to be an iterative process. You're not going to be able to start at the top and work your way down without cycling back in different ways, right? Um, the system changed a couple of years ago, and I'm still sort of um, working on developing what I think the most efficient workflow is. But even that's going to be different for different teams, right? So I'm going to show you what the basics are. I'm going to point to some of these interdependencies, like I talked about, give you some words of warning, some things to think about, and then you'll develop your own processes, right? And if there's anything that you want help with, if you have any questions about any of that, don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll be happy to offer that. Okay, so um, just going to start here with compensation and training. What you're seeing here is the base wage. Are you going to give your employees a raise? How big of a raise are you going to give them? Do you think they get paid too much? Are you going to take away pay from them? Right? Um, incentives. So this is manufacturing. So not every product that gets produced meets quality standards. Some of them are scrap. They have to be thrown away. So this incentive pay, each worker gets a bonus for each non-rejected pair they produce. Okay. How big of a bonus is that going to be? Okay. Give them nothing. You can give them as much as $8 a pair, right? Fringe benefits. You can increase or decrease that. Okay. Um, best practices training. Let me come back to that in a second. The things to think about when you're looking at the compensation, the different kinds of compensation, and hopefully there's some HR expertise or experience on your team. Um, if you pay your workers more, obviously your labor costs are likely to be higher. So there may be an instinct to say, we don't want to pay our workers much because maybe we're trying to be low cost leaders, which means obviously we have to have low wages, right? The problem is, people who don't get paid much tend to not be very motivated. They tend to not be very productive. Okay, and so what you'll actually see um, down as you go through these screens, you can see how productive your people are. So based on the decisions you're making, what does that mean in terms of the number of shoes that each worker is able to make? Right here, projected workforce productivity, right? That's how many pairs of shoes each worker is going to make in this particular factory, right? It's possible that if you pay them more, you'll actually get more out of them. So by paying them more, your cost might go down, your cost per pair, right? And so you got to think about that. Best practices training. Um, you can increase or decrease this. Thing to think about with training, it's the same sort of thing. It's a cost. It's an investment you're making because if you do it right, if you do it effectively, then your workers are going to be better at their jobs, which means they're going to be more efficient. Okay. Um, the thing with best practices training, it's like most kinds of training. Um, it's a something that develops over time, right? So if you spend a bunch of money training your people once, they're going to get a little bit better, right? But if you train them consistently over time, you're going to see the benefits accrue. They'll grow over time. Okay, so this is something you want to think about. Really, all of these decisions are going to be things you want to think about um, with a long-term perspective, right? So, what is our plan for training? Not just how much should we train this year, right? And that's you're going to see that in finance, you're going to see that in capacity, your facilities. You're going to see that in a lot of different places. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about the strategy stuff now. I'm going to talk about that later in a separate video. But clearly, you need to be thinking about as you go through each of these functions, specifically how does it fit in with, how does it support whatever strategic position you're trying to achieve. Okay. Um, maybe that means a lot of best practices training, maybe it doesn't. The other thing to remember, and this is true of just about everything, there's always a trade off, right? So there's no benefit without a cost, right? And there's also, for pretty much any decision you might make, there comes a point of diminishing returns, right? So you might say, all right, does paying my workers a little bit more instead of giving them a 1% increase, give them a 5% increase, does that make them more productive? Sure, I'm getting almost 100 pairs more out of each worker just by virtue of paying them a little bit higher wage, right? Now, the effect that that has on overall cost per pair is something you might need to figure out. But the point is, at some point, if you continue to pay them more, the benefit that you get from that is going to level out. And it no longer makes sense to keep increasing. Okay. So your job is going to be, in a lot of cases, to find that optimum sweet spot, right? Given your strategy, given your operations, what's the right level of compensation, incentive, base wage, these kind of things, right? And because of the interactions among all the different functions in the organization, what's right for you, what's optimal for your company will be different than what's optimal for other companies, right? And I think, again, that's something I can illustrate for you a little bit later, right? Um, but in terms of diagnosing or sort of understanding in the short term, right now, today, what's the impact of these decisions I'm making, which isn't necessarily the right perspective, but it is something you want to keep in mind. Down here at the bottom, it gives you a total cost of production labor per pair. Okay, so as you make these changes up here, let's say I'm going to give them let's check the baseline first. So right now, given the decisions I'm making, it costs me a little over $9 a pair to produce the shoes, right? What happens if I give them a slightly bigger bonus? I'm going to give them a buck 50, right? Notice that that increases their productivity, but the cost per pair actually went up, right? So yeah, they got more productive, but I'm also paying them more. And in this case, in the short run, it doesn't look like that's a necessarily a very smart decision, right? If I give them a slightly bigger raise, right? Okay, same thing. Productivity went up, but cost of labor went up as well, right? Because the productivity is not enough to offset the increase in the pay. Okay, so again, I'm just showing these as illustrations. Clearly, when you make these decisions, you need to make them with a much broader, more holistic and long-term plan kind of in mind. Okay, to point out here too, you can decide how many workers each supervisor oversees. So the lower this ratio, the lower this number, the more staff members you're going to have, the more managers you're going to have, right? You have to pay them, right? You can also change how much your managers get paid. You can increase or decrease their pay. Okay. The idea being that more managers, more oversight will lead to more productive employees, less loafing, however you want to think about it. Okay? But more managers means more managerial salaries. Okay, so you have to manage that. Okay. Um, Something I should point out here too. You'll notice that there's zeros here in Europe and there's zeros here in Latin America. This is a global enterprise that you are managing now. Okay, 4 geographic regions. Right now, when you take over the company, because this company has already been operating for a number of years before you took over, right? You have 2 factories. You have one in North America, you have one in Asia. Okay, now, so those are the only 2 factories you have. So those are the only 2 places where you can make decisions about your human resources. Okay, um, you'll see in a later screen, you can actually choose to open factories in other regions. You can choose to close these factories if you want to, right? You can choose to expand or contract a factory that you already have. Okay, so all of those sort of capacity and production decisions are going to be up to you. All right, we'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay, so that's the HR compensation training. You go to the next screen, which is branded production. Okay, another decision you have to make is what kind of shoes are you going to produce, right? It doesn't get down to the level of we're going to make yellow shoes, we're going to make blue shoes, right? It's not like that. But you do decide what your SQ rating is going to be. SQ stands for style and quality. Okay, it just gets rolled into this one rating that can be between 1 and 10, basically. Okay, the higher the SQ, the more stylish and the higher quality the shoes are. Okay, so again, I'm going to talk about strategy later, but you're going to pick a strategy and you're going to say, what's the right way for us to execute that strategy? So maybe you decide to be broad differentiators, which means you're going to have the highest perceived value. People are going to be willing to pay more for your shoes than they are for anybody else's. That's one possible strategy. Okay. Um, Now, how do you do that? How do you achieve that perceived value? One way is going to be tied to your SQ, right? The higher the quality, the more stylish the shoes, the higher the perceived value is going to be, right? But this is the trade-off: the higher your costs are going to be to produce those shoes. Okay, so that's really what this stuff is determining. And before I get into the details there, let me say, if you want to be a differentiator, that does not mean you have to have super high quality shoes. It doesn't mean you have to have an 8 or 9 or 10 star SQ rating, because perceived value is affected by things other than just the SQ. Okay, so perceived value of your product is going to be affected by things like your marketing. Okay, so maybe you're just going to do a kick-ass job marketing so that people are willing to pay more for your shoes, which themselves are relatively average. Okay, it's the Coca-Cola model, right? There's other ways. There's other things that affect perceived value. Don't think that it's just about SQ. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. I keep pointing at the screen as if you can see what I'm pointing at. You in the two factories, you have to decide what kind of shoes you're going to produce. In each factory, they're basically in the short run two variables that affect your SQ rating. The two variables are the percentage of superior materials and how much you spend on styling and features. Okay, number of models is stuck in between those two. Number of models has no impact on your SQ at all. Okay, TQM is down here at the bottom. This also has an effect on SQ, but this is more of a long-term thing because it is a training kind of initiative, just like the best practices training. So, similarly, if you spend more on SQ, and I can show you here, given these decisions, we're going to produce four-star shoes in North America, right? In our North American factory. Let's say I spend $5 per pair on best practices. That boosts my SQ to 5.7 this year, right? If I continue to spend that much on SQ year after year, then if everything else stays the same, my SQ will go up more, okay, because there's a learning curve effect there, right? Now, like I was saying before with the point of diminishing returns and all that, it's almost never going to be optimal to maximize or minimize any of these numbers, right? The optimal value is almost always going to be somewhere in the middle of the range, okay? In this case specifically, before you get to this screen, you need to have decided what's your strategy going to be and what do you want your SQ to be to support that strategy. Are you going to produce four-star shoes, six-star, 10-star, two-star? Entirely up to you, okay? This is where you embody, you execute that strategic direction, okay? So let's just say hypothetically, um, we want to produce six-star shoes. That's our decision, okay? All right, so these numbers aren't going to get us there, right? So we're going to, let's say, instead of 32% superior materials, let's bump that up to 100. Okay, that doesn't quite get us to six-star shoes yet. So I need to change something else, which is maybe I need to spend more on styling and features. Okay, so 20. Oh, nope, that's too high, right? I'm going to get 5.9. Bam. Okay. So in our North American factory, if we use 100% superior materials and we spend $16,000 per model on styling and features, we will produce the six-star shoes that we want to sell. Okay. Awesome. Except we're dealing with a multivariable problem here, right? We have three different, I didn't even touch TQM and Six Sigma to get to the six-star, right? But I could have. I could have adjusted this too. I've got three different numbers that I can change, which have an impact on my six stars, right? Or on my SQ rating. What you have to think about is the fact that whatever you do, it doesn't matter what your strategy is, you want to be as efficient as you possibly can be, right? So we talked about this in class. Even if you're a differentiator going for super high perceived value, that doesn't mean your costs can just get out of control. You still have to keep them as low as they can get, right? The costs of a differentiator will be higher than the cost of a cost leader, but they shouldn't be any higher than they need to be. Okay. And this is a perfect illustration. Maybe there's a different combination of these three variables, which will lead us to a lower production cost, right? We talked about this in class too. What the customer sees is the six-star shoe. They don't see how much it cost you to make it. So you might as well get the six stars at the lowest possible cost. Okay. So what that means is you need to do some optimization when it comes to these values. All right. So let's just take this as our baseline and let's see if we can actually improve things. Right now, our total branded production cost based on those inputs, $28.70 per pair. Right. Okay. Let's say instead of maximizing materials, let's bump up styling and features instead. I'm going to 28.77. Somebody remember that number. Okay. Can increase that. No, that's way too high of a star. I don't want to make 7.9 star shoes. I want to make six-star shoes. Okay, so I'm going to come back. I'm going to reduce this. Boom, six-star shoes. Now, well, looky there. Instead of 28.77, my production costs are 26.27. I just saved myself over $2 per pair in production cost just by optimizing my mix of materials, styling, and TQM. Okay. And that's probably not even near optimal, right? Because those are two possible combinations out of many. Okay. So if you really want to do this well, if you really want to succeed, you're going to have to spend more time optimizing that, right? And again, um, the right combination. Let's say there are four teams that all want to make 6-star shoes. Totally fine. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I'll again more about that when we get to the strategy stuff, right? But in terms of what's the right way, the most efficient, most low cost way to achieve 6-star shoes, it's going to be different for different companies, right? And I can sort of illustrate why that is here. Um, Superior materials is a an additional cost on every single pair you make, right? Superior materials cost more than regular materials. Okay, um, kind of obvious. Styling and features. Look here, it says thousands of dollars per model. So this is not an additional cost per shoe. It's an additional cost per model. We'll talk about models more in just a second, but think of models as different colors, different styles, different patterns, different designs, right? So what this means is, let's say you're a company that is you plan on being high volume. You're going to produce and sell a lot of shoes. Okay, market share is not what matters, right? In the end, that's not ultimately what matters. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed, but maybe you're going to be a high volume producer. Okay, what that means is, okay, sorry, if you're going to be a high volume producer, let's say you're also going to produce a relatively small number of models. Okay, what that means is your most efficient way of getting 6 stars may be to spend less on superior materials because that's a per shoe cost and you're making a lot of shoes, and increase how much you spend on styling and features because that's a per model cost and you're making relatively few models. Okay. You could think of a different company that's also producing 6-star shoes, but maybe they're trying to offer a bunch of models and selling a relatively small volume. Okay. In that case, for them, it might make sense to spend more on materials and less on styling and features. Okay. I wish we could do this in person so you could ask questions, right? But I hope you see what I'm saying with respect to that trade off. Okay. So you want to get the SQ rating you're aiming for, the lowest possible cost. You're going to do that by adjusting materials, styling, and PQM. Your combination, your optimal combination will be different to other companies based on other elements of the strategy and other decisions you're making in this function and in others. Okay. Um, the thing with models, it does not affect SQ, but it does affect your perceived value, right? And this is one thing that people tend to get turned around on. They assume that fewer models is more exclusive, and so people are gonna want it more. It's going to increase the perceived value if I offer fewer models, right? That's wrong. It's just completely backwards. Okay, because for one thing, um, in the simulation is very realistic in terms of the dynamics and the way the competitive interactions happen and all that sort of thing. But what it lacks is psychology, right? So you don't have to deal with consumer psychology, right? Artificial scarcity is not going to help you. Okay, that's one thing. But the other thing is understanding what models are, right? So you take like a really extreme example. Let's say that you walked into a shoe store and they only had one style of shoe in one color. Okay. Some of you may love that style and love that color, but a lot of you are going to be like, it's not me. I don't like that. Right? It's not my taste. Okay. Versus walk into a shoe store where they offer 500 different models, all in different colors, all in different styles. Pretty good chance you're going to find something that's exactly right for you as the consumer. Okay. So in this case, the higher the number of models you offer, all else being equal, the higher the perceived value is going to be. Okay. But also the higher the costs are going to be. We'll talk about that specific cost again in a minute because it ties into something in another area. Okay. So we'll come back to that. But again, if you're trying to differentiate yourself, high SQ is one way to do it. It contributes to it. High number of models is another way. right? That you could approach it, or you could do both, right? But again, you got to think about the effect that's having on your cost. If you try to be, really high end in everything, you could expect to have very high costs, and at some point, you may not be creating the total value that you need to. Okay. Um, the other thing here, so again, like I mentioned before, you've got the two factories. You can theoretically make, let's say, 6-star shoes in North America and 2-star shoes in Asia. It's completely up to you, right? What I'm going to tell you is don't do that. Okay. Um, you'll see later on that, I mean, even though it's permissible and, it's, there's nothing technically wrong with it, it's going to make your life really complicated in another part of the company. And it's likely to cause your costs to be much higher in another part of the company if you choose to make different SQs in the different factories. Okay. Um, Same thing with the number of models. You want to keep that the same across the. So if I'm making these decisions and I've decided as a company we're going to produce 6-star shoes, now I also need to come over to my Asia facility and I need to change my inputs to get 6-star shoes there too. Okay. Um, so that's the stuff on top. And again, as you're making those decisions, you can come down here and you can see the effect that that's having on your um, total production cost per pair. Which, and this is a really cool thing, as you're going through these decisions, um, you can sort of back out all the different constituent elements, right? So let's say you're looking at, and let's just do this. Let's get Asia up. That's going to be, we're going to be a 6-star company, okay? And I'm not going to bother trying to optimize this. I'm just going to try to get it. Okay. Um, ah, keep overshooting. Close, so close. Okay, so that's my 6-star. Now I want to come down here and I'm going to look and I'm going to say, hey, my production costs of 6-star shoes in North America are higher than they are in Asia. If I go back up through each of these elements, I can figure out where the differences are, right? Actually, the way I've made these decisions, see how I'm using 100% superior materials here, but only 24% here? So my material cost per pair is actually higher in Asia than it is in North America, right? But my labor cost per pair is lower. Okay. So being able to work your way back through these numbers will really help you understand what's going on, to diagnose any problem, and to improve your situation as you go along. Okay. This part down here, this is where you decide how many pairs to actually produce in each factory. Okay, so you have a certain amount of capacity in each factory, right? So in North America, you have 4,000 pairs worth of capacity. You could make up to 4,000 pairs on first shift. Okay, you also have the ability to ask your employees to work overtime. So you can make another 20% on top of that on overtime. Okay. So your total capacity in North America is 4,800 pairs. Total capacity in Asia is 4,800 pairs. Okay. That doesn't mean you should necessarily produce all of those. Right. Now, I was saying before that you can't go linearly down through these decisions, and this is a perfect illustration of why. Right. You can't possibly decide how many shoes to make next year yet because you haven't made all of your marketing decisions that are going to contribute to your demand forecast. Okay. So how many shoes you make needs to be consistent with how many shoes people are going to want. And how many shoes people are going to want depends on your price and promotion and things that we haven't gotten to yet. But it also depends on the price, the promotion, the quality, and all of these other characteristics of your competitors' products. Okay, and we haven't done anything about that yet either. Okay, so this is an example of where you can do this stuff at the top right now, right? Because you've already decided this is my strategy and this is how I'm going to execute it, right? So here's part of that execution. This section in the middle you cannot do yet because you don't know what your demand forecast is going to be. Okay. Um, I think I'm going to leave off there and close this down and process this one and get it up. And then I'll come back and I'll start a new video moving on to this next production facilities decision. So I hope this is you're finding this helpful, and I will be back shortly.